Arc 4, Chapter 1, a note between pages. The first snow of late winter arrived quietly. Not enough to cover the valley. Not enough to stop travelers. Just enough to dust the rooftops and paint the orchard white once again. Elias noticed it before sunrise. A thin layer of snow rested atop the fence posts. The branches of the apple trees glittered beneath moonlight. The valley looked peaceful, half asleep, as though winter wasn't quite ready to leave. He stood on the porch, with a mug of hot tea warming his hands. Steam drifted upward into the cold morning air. Behind him, the Firefly Lantern Inn glowed softly. Lantern light shone through frosted windows. The chimney released a lazy trail of smoke into the pale sky. The inn looked beautiful from here. Comfortable, welcoming, alive. Months ago, the building had been abandoned. Now, travelers deliberately changed routes just to visit. The thought still felt strange. A good strange. The kind that made him smile. Eventually the cold convinced him to head inside. The common hall greeted him with warmth. The fireplace crackled. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath his boots. Everything felt familiar. The inn had developed routines. Morning fires. Fresh bread. Guests slowly emerging from upstairs. A rhythm. A heartbeat. Elias liked routines, especially after his previous life. The modern world had always felt rushed. Endless schedules. Deadlines. Notifications. Mornings unfolded. Slowly. Naturally. Like dough rising beside a warm stove. The thought reminded him of breakfast. Today's menu would be simple. Honey oat porridge. Fresh bread. Apple preserves. Mulled tea. Comfort food. Winter food. The kind of meal that encouraged people to linger at the table. He moved into the kitchen. A few moments later, the familiar sounds began. Wood chopping. Water heating. The soft scrape of knives against cutting boards. The gentle bubbling of porridge. Cooking had become strangely meditative. Each task flowed naturally into the next. No rush. No pressure. Just small actions, performed carefully. The aroma soon spread throughout the inn. Warm oats. Honey. Fresh bread. The smell drifted upstairs. Predictably, footsteps followed. Harold appeared first. The merchant had stayed longer than originally planned. Not because he had nowhere to go, because he genuinely enjoyed being here. A fact he denied whenever possible. It's the weather. Of course. Naturally. The weather had apparently forced him to stay for nearly 2 weeks. A fascinating meteorological phenomenon. Warning. Warning. Harold sniffed the air. Porridge. Porridge. Excellent. The conversation concluded. No further details required. Breakfast eventually filled the common hall. Steam rose from bowls. Tea warmed cold hands. Outside, pale winter sunlight brightened the snow-covered landscape. Inside, the inn felt cozy enough to make people forget the cold entirely. For a while, everything remained perfectly ordinary. Then Elias noticed something. The guest book. The leather-bound journal rested beside the fireplace, exactly where he always kept it. Yet somehow it looked different. Perhaps because it was growing thicker. More pages filled. More stories collected. More memories preserved. The sight drew him closer. After breakfast, he settled into a chair and opened it. The earliest entries greeted him first. Harold's enthusiastic praise of the bread. Thomas's detailed opinions regarding biscuits. Illyra's beautiful sketches. Dozens of notes followed. Small pieces of people's lives. A shepherd describing spring flowers. A merchant recalling an unexpected snowstorm. A traveler thanking the inn for a warm bed. Simple things, yet strangely meaningful. As Elias turned another page, a folded piece of paper slipped free. He frowned. That hadn't been there before. Carefully unfolding it, he discovered a handwritten note. The handwriting wasn't familiar. Unlike most guest book entries, this note wasn't addressed to the innkeeper. It seemed addressed to whoever found it. The message was brief. To whoever reads this, if you enjoy quiet places, follow the old shepherd trail beyond the orchard. Keep walking until you find the stone wall. There's something hidden there. I think it deserves to be remembered. A traveller. Elias blinked. Then reread the note. Then read it again. The message wasn't particularly mysterious, yet curiosity immediately sparked. The stone wall. Something hidden. Beyond the orchard. Interesting. Very interesting. Harold wandered over carrying tea. What've you got there? Elias handed over the note. The merchant read it, then laughed. Oh no. What? I know that look. What look? The look people get before they go exploring. Elias frowned. I do not have a look. You absolutely have a look. Harold handed back the note. You're going to investigate. Probably. Of course you are. The merchant sipped his tea, then pointed toward the guest book. You know what's funny? What? A few months ago this thing was empty. Elias glanced toward the journal. Harold wasn't wrong. Back then, the inn had barely existed. Now, the book contained stories, sketches, advice, directions, memories. It had become more than a journal. It had become a conversation. Travelers speaking to future travelers. People leaving small gifts behind. The realization felt oddly satisfying. A notification appeared. Guest book tradition expanded. Traveler notes discovered. New activity type unlocked. Local exploration. Community reputation increased. Now that was new. Local exploration. The words lingered in his thoughts. Until now, most of Elias's world had revolved around the inn itself. The common hall. The orchard. The kitchen. The road. Comfortable boundaries. Yet perhaps it was time to explore a little further. Not because adventure demanded it, because curiosity did. The rest of the morning passed peacefully. Guests came and went. Tea was served. Bread was baked. Snow slowly melted from the rooftops, beneath weak winter sunlight. All the while, the note remained tucked into Elias's apron pocket. A small reminder. A quiet invitation. By midday, curiosity had fully won. Naturally, he packed a small satchel, a loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, a thermos of hot tea. Winter encouraged preparation. The valley rewarded caution. Harold watched from the doorway. You'll be back before dinner. Probably. There it is again. What? The look. Elias rolled his eyes. The merchant laughed. The journey began shortly afterward. The orchard lay silent beneath patches of snow. The trees stood bare, patiently waiting for spring. Beyond them, a narrow trail wound into the hills. Or easy to miss. The shepherd path. Exactly as the note described. For the first time since arriving in this world, Elias stepped beyond the familiar boundaries of the inn. The experience felt surprisingly exciting, not because danger waited ahead, because possibility did. The valley suddenly seemed larger, more alive, filled with places he had never seen, stories he had never heard, people he had never met. The road behind him led home. The path ahead led somewhere new, and under the pale winter sky, with snow crunching softly beneath his boots, Elias followed the trail into the hills. Somewhere ahead, beyond the orchard, and beyond the stone wall mentioned in the note, something waited to be discovered. He had no idea what it might be. Yet, for the first time in a long while, that uncertainty felt exciting. Not stressful, not dangerous. Simply exciting, like opening a new page in the guest book and wondering what story might appear next. Behind him, the Firefly Lantern Inn continued glowing warmly against the winter landscape. Ahead, the valley quiet, he revealed its secrets, and thus, without realizing it, Elias took the first step into the next chapter of his life. Arc 4, Chapter 2, Beyond the Orchard. The path beyond the orchard was older than Elias expected. At first, it looked like nothing more than a narrow trail winding between snow-covered trees. But the farther he walked, the more signs of age appeared. Stone markers half buried beneath moss, weathered fence posts leaning beneath decades of wind and snow, ancient cart ruts frozen into the earth. Someone had traveled this route for a very long time, perhaps generations. Now only a handful of people seemed to remember it existed. The realization made the valley feel larger, richer, as though hidden layers existed beneath everyday life. The firefly lantern inn sat behind him now, its chimney barely visible through the trees. Ahead stretched rolling hills covered in winter silence. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The sound became a steady rhythm accompanying the journey. Crunch, step, crunch, step. No wagons, no voices, no distant sounds, only winter. For a while, Elias simply enjoyed walking. The cold air felt refreshing. The landscape seemed peaceful. Months spent running the inn had kept him busy. Very busy. Cooking, cleaning, repairs, siestas, recipes. The days passed pleasantly, yet he realized something now. He hadn't spent much time simply wandering, simply observing. The valley contained more than roads and travelers. It contained secrets, and apparently, one of those secrets waited somewhere ahead. The shepherd path climbed gradually. The incline wasn't difficult, just enough to warm him, despite the cold. After nearly half an hour, the orchard vanished entirely behind the hills. Snow-covered pines appeared instead. So quiet, their branches heavy with fresh snow. Sunlight filtered through them in pale golden shafts. The forest felt almost magical. Not because of actual magic, because of atmosphere. Everything seemed untouched, like a painting frozen in time. Eventually the path curved around a rocky outcrop, and there it was, the stone wall, exactly as the note had described. Elias stopped. The structure stretched across the hillside. Not large, not imposing, yet undeniably old. Moss covered much of the stonework. Small plants grew between cracks. Several sections had collapsed entirely. Time had left its mark. Still, enough remained to suggest what it once had been. A boundary, a garden wall, perhaps even part of an estate. Interesting, very interesting. The note had been accurate. Now came the question. What exactly was hidden beyond it? A narrow opening appeared farther ahead. Elias followed it. Snow crunched softly beneath his boots. The gap widened. The wall ended, and the landscape beyond suddenly revealed itself. He stopped immediately. For several seconds, he simply stared. A greenhouse, or rather, the remains of one. The structure occupied a gentle slope overlooking the valley. Most of the glass had vanished. Many wooden supports leaned at odd angles. Sections of the roof had collapsed years ago. Snow covered much of the interior. Vines tangled across the frame. Nature had slowly reclaimed the building. Yet somehow, it remained beautiful. The ruins possessed a quiet dignity, like an elderly gardener resting after a lifetime of work. A notification appeared. Discovery complete. Forgotten greenhouse. Historical site. Status. Abandoned. Potential project available. Elias slowly approached. The greenhouse looked larger up close. Stone foundations remained intact. Raised garden beds lined the interior. Several irrigation channels crossed the ground. Even after years of neglect, the design remained impressive. Someone had invested tremendous effort into this place. Someone had cared deeply. The realization made him curious. Who built it? Why abandon it? What happened here? Unfortunately, the ruins offered no immediate answers, only questions. He stepped through what had once been the entrance. The temperature changed immediately, not dramatically, but enough to notice. Interesting. Very interesting. Despite the missing roof, the interior felt slightly warmer than outside, protected somehow, sheltered. A strange sensation. His breath no longer appeared quite as thick. Snow melted faster. Here, the soil beneath the raised beds looked dark, rich, healthy. Another notification appeared. Environmental trait detected. Frost bless soil. Growth rate. Increase. Cold resistance. Exceptional. Rare cultivation potential. Now, that sounded useful. Extremely useful. Elias knelt beside one of the beds. The soil looked incredible. Dark. Loose. Rich with nutrients. Certainly healthier than most ordinary farmland. Then he noticed something else. Green leaves. Actual green leaves, growing despite winter. Tiny herbs poked through patches of snow. Small flowers bloomed beneath broken glass. Several plants seemed completely unconcerned by the season. Impossible, or at least highly unusual. Carefully, Elias examined them. One plant immediately stood out. Silver-green leaves. Tiny blue blossoms. A pleasant aroma drifted from them. Tall, fresh, almost mint-like. He gently rubbed a leaf between his fingers. The fragrance intensified. A notification appeared. Ingredient identified. Winter mint. Rare culinary herb. Use. Desserts. Baking. Quality. Excellent. Naturally, his first thought involved recipes. The second thought involves tea. The third thought involved pastries. A dangerous progression. Very dangerous. Especially for someone running an inn. He harvested only a small amount. Enough for experimentation. Not enough to damage the patch. The plants deserved respect. They had survived winter far better than most people. The exploration continued. Several more herbs appeared. Most unfamiliar. Some medicinal. Others culinary. A few produced notifications. Others did not. All seemed healthy. The greenhouse clearly possessed unique growing conditions. The more Elias explored, the more excited he became. This place wasn't merely interesting. It had potential. Huge potential. Then he found the plaque. A weathered stone marker partially hidden beneath vines. The inscription had faded with time, yet several lines remained legible. Elias brushed away snow. Then read. May every traveler find warmth. The words felt strangely familiar, almost like the philosophy of the inn itself. Below appeared another line. Fainter. Harder to read. Food shared is never wasted. Elias smiled. Whoever built this place would have gotten along wonderfully with innkeepers. The message resonated deeply. A simple truth. A good meal carried value beyond ingredients. It created memories, connections, community. Exactly what he had been building at the Firefly Lantern Inn. For a long while, he wandered among the ruins. No rush. No schedule. Just curiosity. The greenhouse rewarded slow exploration. Interesting details appeared everywhere. Old gardening tools, stone benches, broken pots, faded plant markers. Evidence of a life once lived here. A life centered around growing things. The atmosphere felt peaceful, comfortable, not sad, despite the abandonment. Perhaps because the greenhouse wasn't truly dead. Plants still grew. The soil remained fertile. The structure endured, waiting, patiently, a place sleeping rather than gone. Around midday, Elias settled onto a stone bench. He unpacked lunch. Bread, cheese, simple food, the sort of meal that tasted better outdoors, especially after a war. The valley stretched below him. White hills, snow-covered forests, distant roads, and far away, nearly hidden among the landscape, the Firefly Lantern Inn, a tiny shape beside the orchard, smoke rising from its chimney, warm, inviting, home. The sight filled him with unexpected emotion. Months ago, he had arrived with nothing. No plan, no certainty, just an abandoned building and a mysterious system. Now, that building had become something meaningful. Travelers returned. Stories accumulated. Memories filled the guest book. And somehow, without realizing it, he had created a place people cared about. The thought stayed with him throughout lunch. Afterward, he explored one final section of the greenhouse. Near the rear stood a partially collapsed storage shed. Most of the roof had fallen. Snow covered everything. Yet something gleamed beneath the debris. Curious. Elias brushed aside accumulated snow. A wooden box emerged. Weathered, but surprisingly intact. His pulse quickened slightly. The box wasn't locked. Carefully, he opened it. Inside rested several packets wrapped in waxed cloth. Seeds. Ancient seeds, or at least very old ones. A notification immediately appeared. Special item found. Heirloom greenhouse seeds. Preservation status. Excellent. Compatibility. Frost bless soil. Potential crops. Unknown. For several seconds, Elia simply stared, then grinned. Well, that changed things. The greenhouse wasn't merely a discovery anymore. It was a project, a future, a possibility. Seeds meant planting. Planting meant growing. Growing meant ingredients. Ingredients meant recipes. And recipes inevitably meant happy guests. Everything connected. The realization felt wonderfully exciting. Not dramatic. Not urgent. The cozy kind of excitement. The kind involving gardening plans and notebook sketches. The kind that lasted for months. The journey home felt shorter. Perhaps because his mind remained busy. Ideas filled every spare thought. Greenhouse repairs. Herb cultivation. New teas. Seasonal desserts. Special menu items. The possibilities seemed endless. By the time the inn appeared ahead, afternoon sunlight painted the snow golden. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Warmth waited inside. Harold sat near the fireplace reading when Elias entered. The merchant glanced up, then immediately noticed the expression on his face. Oh no, Elias laughed. What? You found a project. I found a greenhouse. That's worse. The merchant sighed dramatically. Much worse. Elias set the seed packets on the table, then placed the winter mint beside them. Harold stared, then blinked, then stared again. Okay. He nodded slowly. Maybe it's not worse. The rest of the afternoon disappeared into planning. Sketches covered the table. Notes accumulated. Ideas multiplied. The guest book gained another entry. This one written by Elias himself. A simple note. The traveler who left directions was right. The greenhouse still lives. That evening, snow began falling once more. Soft flakes drifted beyond the windows. The fireplace glowed warmly. Fresh bread baked in the oven. And for the first time in months, Elias found himself looking forward, not merely to tomorrow's guests, but to tomorrow's garden. Somewhere beyond the orchard, hidden behind an ancient stone wall, a forgotten greenhouse waited. And soon, very soon, it would belong to the story of the Firefly Lantern Inn. Arc 4, Chapter 3, The First Day of Restoration. The next morning began with snow. Not a storm, not even enough to cover the old tracks left in the orchard. Just a light, dusting drifting lazily through the air. The kind of snowfall that seemed more decorative than practical. Elias noticed it while kneading bread dough. Through the kitchen window, tiny white flakes floated past like feathers. The sight made the entire world feel slower, softer, more patient. Exactly the sort of morning suited for baking and planning. Especially planning, because ever since discovering the greenhouse, his thoughts had been occupied by little else. The seed packets rested safely on a shelf near the recipe ledger. The winter mint leaves had been carefully dried overnight. Several pages of notes already filled a small notebook. Ideas, measurements, sketches, possibilities. The project had officially moved from curiosity into obsession. A healthy obsession, mostly. The dough beneath his hands stretched smoothly, elastic, soft, comforting. Few tasks calmed him as effectively as bread making. Perhaps because bread refused to be rushed. The dough rose when it was ready. Not before, not after. No amount of worrying changed the process. The lesson felt applicable to many things, including greenhouses, including life. A notification appeared briefly. Innkeeper insight. Some projects grow best with patience. Elias stared at the message, then laughed. The system had become surprisingly philosophical lately. Breakfast remained simple. Maple oatmeal, fresh bread, honey butter, winter mint tea. The tea had been yesterday's experiment. Today became its first official appearance on the menu. Harold volunteered as chief taste tester, a position he had somehow assigned himself. The merchant lifted the steaming mug, examined it, inhaled deeply, then took a sip. For several seconds, he said nothing, a dangerous sign. Then his eyebrows rose. Not helpful. Eventually Harold took another sip, then a third. Then set the mug down. I need more. I praise. Extremely high praise. The tea tasted unique. The first sensation felt cool and fresh, almost like crisp winter air. Then warmth followed. Honey softened the edges. The finish remained smooth and comforting. The combination shouldn't have worked, yet somehow it did. Even Elias found himself impressed. A notification appeared. New beverage created. Wintermint honey tea. Quality. Excellent. Guest appeal. High. Seasonal bonus active. Interesting. Very interesting. The recipe immediately earned a permanent place inside the ledger. After breakfast, Harold settled beside the fireplace with trade records. Meanwhile, Elias prepared for today's real task. The greenhouse. Not exploration. Restoration. Or at least the beginning of restoration. No dramatic renovations. No magical transformations. Just a day of cleaning. The first step in any worthwhile project. He packed carefully. Work gloves. Tools. Twine. A small shovel. Lunch. Everything needed for several comfortable hours outdoors. Winter projects required preparation. The valley rewarded practicality. By mid-morning, he found himself once again following the shepherd path. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The orchard rested quietly behind him. Bare branches stretched toward the pale sky. A few birds fluttered between trees. The valley seemed peaceful, sleepy, still, wrapped in winter. The walk felt easier this time. Familiar. The stone wall appeared sooner than expected. Then the greenhouse emerged beyond it, waiting, silent, patient. Morning sunlight illuminated the broken framework. Snow glittered across the remaining beams. Vines swayed gently in the breeze. The structure looked less abandoned today, perhaps because Elias now viewed it differently. Not as ruins, as a project. Projects changed perspectives. The first task proved obvious. Clear debris. Years of fallen branches littered portions of the greenhouse. Dead vines tangled across support beams. Broken glass fragments remained scattered in corners. Nothing difficult, just time-consuming. The best kind of work for a quiet winter morning. Elias began slowly. No rush. No deadlines. A fallen branch here. A tangled vine there. One section at a time. The greenhouse gradually revealed itself beneath the clutter. Raised garden beds emerged. Stone pathways reappeared. Old irrigation channels became visible once more. Every cleared section felt rewarding, like uncovering hidden history. Hours passed comfortably, the sort of hours that disappeared without notice. Work. More work. A brief pause to admire progress. Then more work. The rhythm became soothing, almost meditative. By noon, several sections looked dramatically improved, not restored, but visible, functional, promising. Elias sat on the stone bench for lunch, the same bench from yesterday, the same view. The valley stretched below him, white hills rolling into the distance, dark forests breaking the landscape, the tiny shape of the Firefly Lantern Inn resting near the orchard. Smoke drifted lazily from its chimney. Foam. Even from here, it looked welcoming. The sight filled him with quiet satisfaction. Not pride exactly. Something gentler. Gratitude, perhaps. For the inn. For the valley. For this unexpected life. After lunch, exploration resumed. Cleaning often revealed surprises. Today proved no exception. Near the northern edge of the greenhouse, Elias uncovered several wooden signs buried beneath snow. Old plant markers. Most lettering had faded. A few remained readable. Winterming. Snow time. Moonleaf sage. Interesting names. Potentially useful names. He carefully collected the markers. Another small piece of history. Another clue regarding what once grew here. A notification appeared. Greenhouse archive updated. Historical crop records found. Future cultivation success increased. The system clearly approved. By mid-afternoon, sunlight filtered through breaks in the clouds. Golden light illuminated the greenhouse. The effect transformed everything. Snow sparkled. The old stone walls glowed warmly. Even the damaged framework seemed beautiful. For a few minutes, Elias simply stood there, observing, listening. The valley remained incredibly quiet. Only distant birdsong interrupted the silence. No traffic, no machines, no noise. The stillness felt luxurious. Back on Earth, silence had become rare. Here it remained abundant, a resource as valuable as fertile soil. The thought lingered while he continued working. Eventually, another discovery appeared. Beneath a collapsed shelf near the storage shed, a notebook, weathered, dusty, but surprisingly intact. Carefully, Elias brushed away dirt. The leather cover creaked softly. Several pages had suffered damage. Many remained readable. His pulse quickened. This wasn't merely a notebook. It was a gardener's journal. The previous caretaker's records. Planting notes, weather observations, recipes, small personal comments, a life preserved between pages. The first readable entry made him smile. Wintermint survived another frost. Stubborn little plant. Another rid. Travelers enjoyed the tea today. Then another. Food tastes better when shared. Elias paused. The phrase felt familiar, because it matched the stone plaque. Food shared is never wasted. The same philosophy, the same voice. Whoever maintained this greenhouse had clearly cared about hospitality, perhaps as much as gardening. Perhaps the two had always belonged together. The journal went carefully into his satchel. Some discoveries deserved protection. By late afternoon, fatigue finally arrived. Pleasant fatigue, the kind earned through meaningful work. The greenhouse looked noticeably different now. Cleaner, brighter, more hopeful, still months away from complete restoration, yet undeniably improving. A notification appeared. Project progress. Restore winter greenhouse. Completion. 12. Milestone reached. Greenhouse condition. Stabilize. 12%. Not much. And yeah, somehow it felt significant. Every large project began with small percentages. Every garden began with seeds. Every inn began with a single guest. The lesson repeated itself often. The walk home occurred beneath a golden winter sunset. The sky glowed amber and rose. Snow reflected the colors beautifully. The entire valley seemed painted in warm light. Even the cold felt gentle. When the inn finally appeared ahead, lanterns already glowed in the windows. Harold sat exactly where expected, near the fireplace, tea in hand. Apparently, some traditions formed quickly. How'd it go? Elias removed his coat, then smiled. We found a journal. The greenhouse, and I. Harold nodded. Reasonable enough. The evening passed peacefully. Soup simmered on the stove. Bread baked. The common hall filled with warm light. After dinner, Elias opened the gardener's journal beside the fire. Page after page reveal small pieces of another person's life. Planting schedules, tea experiments, weather notes, guest observations. Not dramatic, not heroic, just ordinary days. Yet somehow fascinating, because ordinary days built meaningful lives. The realization reminded him of the guest book. Both records preserved similar things. Moments, memories, small joys. Perhaps that was why they felt important. Before bed, Elias made one final entry in the inn's guest book, a short note beneath yesterday's entry. The greenhouse still remembers its gardener. Then he closed the cover. The fire burned low. Snow drifted softly beyond the windows, and somewhere out in the winter valley, hidden beyond the orchard and behind an ancient stone wall, an old greenhouse waited patiently for tomorrow's work. For the first time in many years, Elias found himself genuinely excited about the next morning, not because something dramatic might happen, because something peaceful would, and somehow, that felt even better. Art 4 Chapter 4, The Gardener's Tea. The next morning arrived wrapped in fog, not thick enough to hide the valley entirely, just enough to soften its edges. The orchard beyond the inn appeared dreamlike. Bare apple trees stood among drifting mist, their branches outlined in silver frost. Everything looked quieter than usual, as though the world had lowered its voice. Elia stood on the porch with a mug of wintermint honey tea warming his hands. The steam curled upward. The scent carried notes of honey, herbs, and something fresh that reminded him of snowy mornings. A few days ago, wintermint had been an unknown plant growing in a forgotten greenhouse. Now it had become part of the inn, part of breakfast, part of the rhythm of daily life. That thought pleased him. The best discoveries weren't always dramatic. Sometimes they simply found a place where they belonged. Behind him, the firefly lantern inn slowly woke. The kitchen stove crackled. The floorboards creaked. Somewhere upstairs, the door opened and closed. Morning routines unfolded naturally. The familiar heartbeat of the inn. He finished his tea and headed inside. Breakfast today would be simple. Warm cinnamon porridge, fresh bread, honey butter, stewed apples. Naturally, more wintermint tea. The kitchen quickly filled with comforting aromas. Oats simmered gently. Apples softened in a small pot with cinnamon bark and honey. Fresh dough baked in the oven. The scents blended together perfectly. Sweet, warm, inviting. The kind of smells that convinced people to leave their beds. Not long afterward, Harold appeared. His timing remained suspiciously accurate. Morning, morning. The merchant sniffed the air. Cinnamon, cinnamon. Excellent. Some conversations never needed improvement. Breakfast passed pleasantly. A pair of travelers had arrived late the previous evening. A married couple transporting wool between villages. They occupied a table near the fireplace, eating quietly, watching the snow beyond the windows. The woman eventually took a sip of wintermint tea, then blinked, then took another sip, then immediately asked for a second pot. Elias considered that a success. A notification appeared. Recipe popularity increased. Wintermint honey tea. Just satisfaction. Regional recognition growing. Interesting. Apparently news travelled faster than expected. After breakfast, the travellers continued their journey. The inn became quiet once again. Only Harold remained. And honestly, the merchant seemed perfectly content about it. The common hall settled into a peaceful silence. Fire crackling. Tea steaming. Pages turning. The sort of quiet that never felt empty. Elias spent the next hour reading the gardener's journal. The notebook had become surprisingly fascinating. The entries weren't dramatic. Most described weather, plant growth, tea experiments, small observations. Yet together, they painted a picture of someone's life. A life spent tending plants, welcoming visitors, appreciating ordinary days. One entry caught his attention. A traveler traded me 3 rare tea blends today. In return, I gave him cuttings from the wintermint patch. A fair trade. Tea always tastes better when shared. Another entry appeared several pages later. The greenhouse hosted 6 visitors this afternoon. We drank tea beneath the vines, while snow fell outside. I think plants enjoy company. Elia smiled. The gardener seemed like exactly the sort of person who would have enjoyed the Firefly Lantern Inn. The similarities felt almost uncanny. Perhaps hospitality attracted certain kinds of people. People who enjoyed slowing down. People who appreciated conversations over tea. People who believed small comforts mattered. The thought lingered pleasantly. Eventually, he closed the journal. A new idea had formed. A simple one. The greenhouse deserved tea. Not metaphorically. Literally. Every time he visited, he brought tea anyway. Why not make it part of the tradition? The gardener would probably approve. By late morning, Elias packed a small basket. Bread, cheese, the gardener's journal, and a blanket. Winter exploration felt far more enjoyable with proper supplies. The walk to the greenhouse had already become familiar. The orchard, the shepherd path, the stone wall, the quiet beauty of the valley. Each landmark greeted him like an old friend. Snow crunched beneath his boots. Birds darted between bare branches. Sunlight filtered through pale clouds. The journey felt comfortable. comfortable enough that he stopped noticing time. When the greenhouse finally appeared, it seemed almost welcoming. Several sections already looked cleaner thanks to previous work. The stone pathways had emerged. The raised beds stood visible once again. Progress. Small but meaningful. Today wasn't a restoration day. Not entirely. Today felt more suited to observation, to understanding the place. Sometimes projects benefited from patience. The gardener's journal certainly seemed to support that philosophy. Elias settled onto the stone bench, poured tea into a mug, opened the notebook, and spent nearly an hour simply reading. The greenhouse remained quiet around him. Occasionally a bird landed nearby. Occasionally wind stirred the remaining vines. Otherwise, silence ruled. A peaceful silence, the sort that encouraged reflection. One journal entry described a patch of herbs growing near the eastern wall. Curious. Elias went searching. The gardener had been right. Several plants remained hidden beneath snow. Tiny green leaves peeked through the white surface. Hardy. Determined. Alive. A notification appeared. New ingredient discovered. Snow time. Quality. Excellent. Flavor profile. Earthy. Warm. Aromatic. Recommended uses. Soups. Stews. Roasted vegetables. Well, that seemed promising. Very promising. Naturally, he collected a small sample. Research purposes. Entirely scientific. The system probably understood. Probably. The discovery encouraged further exploration. Several more herbs appeared throughout the afternoon. Most remained dormant. A few stubborn plants continued growing despite winter. The greenhouse seemed full of surprises. Every corner offered something new. Every bed hinted at future possibilities. Hours passed quietly. She was consumed. Notes were taken. Ideas multiplied. The best sort of day. Around mid-afternoon, Elias finally turned his attention toward actual work. Nothing ambitious. Just maintenance. Several damaged support beams needed clearing. Dead vines required trimming. One section of pathway remained buried beneath debris. The tasks suited the peaceful mood perfectly. Slow work. Steady work. The kind that rewarded patience rather than speed. As he worked, another section of the greenhouse gradually emerged. Near the western wall stood a circular stone platform, almost hidden beneath vines. At first glance, it appeared decorative. Then Elias noticed something interesting. Stone benches surrounded it, several of them, arranged carefully, facing inward, like seating around a gathering place. A tea circle, or at least something very similar. The realization made him pause. The gardener's journal suddenly made more sense. Visitors. Conversations. This greenhouse hadn't merely grown plants. It had hosted people. The place had once functioned as a community gathering space, a quiet refuge, not unlike the inn itself. A notification appeared. Feature discovered. Tea circle. Historical gathering space. Potential restoration available. Benefits. Jest events. Tea tastings. Community gatherings. Elias laughed softly. Of course. The greenhouse wasn't just a garden. It was practically an outdoor cousin of the inn. The discovery delighted him. By the time the winter sun began descending toward the horizon, he had cleared much of the tea circle. The stone benches emerged. The platform became visible. The entire area looked surprisingly beautiful, even beneath snow, especially beneath snow. Golden sunlight filtered through the damaged greenhouse frame. Long shadows stretched across the stone. The moment felt timeless, like uncovering a forgotten memory. Eventually, the cold convinced him to head home. The basket felt slightly heavier now. Snow time. Notes. Ideas. Possibilities. The valley glowed amber beneath sunset. The inn's windows shone warmly in the distance. Smoke rose from the chimney. Home waiting patiently. Inside, the familiar warmth wrapped around him immediately. Harold looked up from his chair. Productive day. Elias removed his coat, then smiled. We found a tea circle. The merchant blinked. The greenhouse, and Of course. Harold nodded solemnly. Carry on. Dinner that evening featured a new experiment. Roasted vegetables seasoned with snow thyme. Simple, careful, respectful of the ingredient. The results exceeded expectations. The herb added warmth, comfort. The flavor seemed made for winter meals. Harold requested seconds, then thirds, a reliable indicator of success. The recipe ledger gained another entry. The greenhouse continued proving useful. After dinner, Elias sat beside the fireplace with the gardener's journal. The flames danced softly. The inn remained quiet. Outside, snow drifted gently across the valley. Inside, warmth and tea ruled supreme. He opened the notebook to a random page. A final entry near the back caught his attention. If you're reading this, then the greenhouse is probably still standing. I hope someone is sharing tea here. Some places deserve to stay warm. For a long moment, Elias stared at the words, then smiled. Tomorrow, he decided, he would bring an extra mug, just in case. Not because anyone would be there, because the thought felt right. And sometimes, in a valley filled with snow, gardens, and stories, that was reason enough. Arc 4, Chapter 5, The Cat in the Greenhouse. The snow stopped sometime during the night. When Elias opened the curtains the next morning, sunlight spilled across the valley in sheets of gold. The change felt dramatic. After days of clouds and drifting snow, the world suddenly sparkled. Every branch in the orchard glittered with frost. The rooftops shimmered beneath fresh light. The hills beyond the valley looked carved from crystal. Even the old stone wall near the far edge of the orchard stood out clearly against the white landscape. Winter had not disappeared. It had simply decided to show off. Elias smiled. Days like this always felt special. Not because anything extraordinary happened, because ordinary things looked extraordinary. The firefly lantern inn seemed brighter as well. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The common hall glowed warmly. Dust motes drifted lazily through golden beams. The atmosphere felt peaceful, unhurried, comfortable. Exactly the kind of morning that encouraged slow breakfasts and long cups of tea. Today's menu reflected that mood. Buckwheat pancakes, honey butter, warm berry compote, fresh bread. Of course, winter mint honey tea. The tea had quickly become one of the inn's most requested items. Travelers asked about it. Guests bought small bundles of dried leaves before leaving. Even Harold seemed mildly obsessed, though he denied it repeatedly. I simply appreciate quality tea. Naturally, breakfast passed pleasantly. A pair of traders stopped briefly before continuing south. An elderly shepherd shared stories about unusually stubborn sheep. Harold reviewed maps beside the fireplace. Everything unfolded according to the comfortable rhythm the inn had developed over the winter. Yet throughout the morning, Elias found his thoughts drifting back to the greenhouse. Specifically, the tea circle, the stone benches, the gardener's journal, the lingering feeling that the place was slowly waking up. Not literally, just emotionally. Each visit seemed to uncover another layer, another story, another reason to return. By late morning, he packed a basket once again. Bread, a small container of soup, the gardener's journal, work gloves, the familiar collection. Harold watched from his usual chair. You know, the merchant said, most people visit a ruin once. Elias paused. You've visited every day. It has potential. Harold nodded slowly. That's exactly what worries me. Elias laughed, then headed toward the orchard. The path felt easier now. His boots naturally followed the familiar route, past the bare apple trees, beyond the old shepherd trail, toward the stone wall, toward the greenhouse. The winter air remained cold, yet the sunlight softened everything. Birds darted between trees. Snow melted from exposed rocks. Tiny streams trickled beneath patches of ice. The valley felt alive, not awake yet, but stirring. When the greenhouse finally appeared, Elias immediately noticed something unusual. Tracks. Small tracks. Fresh tracks. He stopped, The prince crossed the snow near the entrance, then disappeared inside. Interesting. Very interesting. The tracks certainly didn't belong to a traveler. Too small, too light. An animal perhaps. A rabbit. A fox. The greenhouse suddenly felt more mysterious. Curious. He followed them. The footprints wound through the stone pathways, between garden beds, past the T-circle. Eventually they vanished near a collapsed section of wall. For several moments, nothing happened. The greenhouse remained quiet, still, peaceful. Then came a sound. A tiny sound. Soft, questioning. Moreau. Elias blinked. Then, looked around. Another sound followed. Moreau. Definitely not a rabbit. Carefully, he moved toward the source. The noise came from beneath an old wooden shelf, partially hidden by vines, partially hidden by snow, and entirely hidden from view, until a small face emerged. Two bright eyes stared up at him, then a tiny nose, then a pair of fluffy ears. A cat, a very small cat, a very fluffy cat, a very fluffy cat covered in snow. The creature regarded him carefully. Elias regarded it carefully. For several seconds. My the moo. The cat finally broke the silence. Moreau. The meaning seemed obvious. Food. Probably. The cat looked young. Not a kitten, but not fully grown either. Its fur resembled fresh snow, white with hints of silver. The tail looked absurdly fluffy, the sort of tail artists exaggerated in paintings. Yet there it was, perfectly real. A notification appeared. New discovery. Snowtail cat. Temperament. Unknown. Affinity. Winter regions. Current mood. Hungry. Elias stared, then laughed. Current mood hungry. The system truly understood cats. Slowly, he crouched. The cat remained cautious, not frightened, simply evaluating. A reasonable decision. Eventually, Elias opened the basket. The aroma of bread and soup escaped immediately. The cat's ears twitched, then twitched again. Interesting development. A small portion of chicken from yesterday's dinner seemed appropriate. Carefully, he placed it nearby, then waited. Patience mattered, especially with nervous animals. The cat observed the food, observed Elias, observed the food again. A difficult decision. Eventually, hunger won. The tiny creature approached, one cautious step at a time. Then another, then another. The chicken disappeared astonishingly quickly. Apparently the notification had been accurate. Very hungry. The cat finished eating, licked a paw, then sat down, as though this entire arrangement had been perfectly reasonable from the beginning. Elias couldn't help smiling. The greenhouse suddenly felt less empty. The next hour passed quietly. Reading. Observation. The cat remained nearby, not close, but nearby, occasionally exploring, occasionally watching, occasionally pretending not to watch. A classic cat strategy. The gardener's journal rested open across Elias's lap. One particular passage caught his attention. A white cat appeared today, stole half my lunch, stayed anyway. I suppose we live together now. Elias blinked, then reread the line, then looked toward the fluffy white cat. The cat blinked back. For a moment, he felt strangely certain, not because of logic, not because of evidence, just a feeling. The cat somehow belonged here. Perhaps descendants of the original cat still wandered the valley. Perhaps coincidence. Either explanation seemed equally possible. Around noon, Elias shared lunch. The cat received a small portion. The arrangement appeared acceptable to everyone involved, especially the cat. Afterward, he resumed work. Today's task focused on clearing additional sections around the T-circle. The stone benches continued emerging from beneath snow and vines. Each newly uncovered piece revealed more of the original design. The gardener had created something beautiful, a place for conversation. The tea, the quiet afternoons, the sort of place people remembered. As he worked, The cat occasionally wandered nearby, investigating tools, inspecting snow piles, providing absolutely no practical assistance, an important role, nonetheless. The greenhouse somehow felt warmer with company, even feline company. Hours drifted by. Sunlight crossed the stone floor. The shadows slowly shifted. The peaceful rhythm continued. Work. Reading. More work. An excellent schedule. Mid-afternoon. Another notification appeared. Project progress. Restore winter greenhouse. Completion. 18. T-circle restoration. 42. Steady progress. Not dramatic. Not fast. Exactly right. The best projects grew gradually. Like gardens. Like friendships. Like inns. Eventually the winter sun began descending. Golden light filled the greenhouse. The remaining glass fragments sparkled. The snow glowed softly. The entire structure looked almost magical. The cat sat atop one of the stone benches, tail wrapped neatly around its paws, watching the sunset, or perhaps simply existing. Cats rarely explained themselves. When it came time to leave, Elias packed his things slowly. The cat watched. The cat continued watching. The cat appeared mildly concerned, then mildly curious, then mildly annoyed. A complex emotional journey. Elias stood, adjusted his scarf, prepared to head home. The cat followed, not immediately, not obviously, just far enough behind to maintain plausible deniability, a professional approach. By the time the orchard appeared, the cat remained there, several yards behind. Pretending coincidence, Elias said nothing. The cat said nothing. The arrangement continued. Eventually the Firefly Lantern Inn came into view. Warm windows, glowing lanterns, smoke rising into the evening sky. Home. The cat stopped, studied the building, then sat down. Apparently further negotiations would occur later. Inside, Harold glanced up as Elias entered. Ow! Was the greenhouse. Elias removed his coat, then smiled. We found a cat. The merchant sighed deeply. The sigh of a man who had witnessed enough projects to recognize another one beginning. Oh no. What? You used the word "wit" again. Elias laughed. The evening passed peacefully. Dinner simmered. The fireplace crackled. Snow reflected lantern light beyond the windows. And somewhere outside, beneath the winter stars, a fluffy white cat sat near the orchard, watching the inn, waiting, as though deciding whether it belonged there, or perhaps whether the inn belonged to it. Either way, Elias suspected tomorrow would be interesting, in a very cozy sort of way. Arc 4 Chapter 6 A place by the hearth. The cat was still there the next morning. Elias discovered this while opening the front door before sunrise. The sky remained dark. A faint band of silver rested along the eastern horizon. The valley still slept beneath winter's quiet blanket. Snow covered the orchard, the road, the fences. Everything seemed frozen in soft blue shadows, and sitting neatly beside the porch steps was a fluffy white cat. The cat looked up. Elias looked down. For several moments, neither spoke. Then the cat blinked, slowly, deliberately, a gesture that somehow communicated complete confidence, as though it had expected him to arrive eventually. A notification appeared. Snowtail cat. Current mood. Patient. Expectation. Breakfast. Elias laughed softly. The cat's expectations appeared entirely reasonable. Good morning to you too. The cat stretched. Its front paws extended forward. Its back arched. Its tail puffed into an impressive plume. Then it sat down again, waiting, very patiently. Breakfast, apparently, remained non-negotiable. Inside, the inn felt wonderfully warm. The fireplace still glowed from the previous evening. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and baked bread. Everything felt familiar, comfortable. The cat followed him through the doorway, not hesitantly, not cautiously, as though entering inns was something it did regularly. The little creature paused inside, examined the common hall, examined the fireplace, examined the kitchen, then nodded to itself. apparently satisfied. The inspection passed. The Firefly Lantern Inn met required standards. The cat immediately settled near the hearth. Not too close, just close enough to enjoy the warmth. A very professional position. Elia suspected it had experience. While preparing breakfast, he occasionally glanced toward the fireplace. Each time, the cat appeared slightly more relaxed. First sitting, then loafing, then stretching, then fully asleep. Remarkable progress. The morning menu consisted of honey oat bread, baked apples, and winter mint tea. Simple food, comforting food, exactly suited to a cold winter morning. As the bread baked, warm aromas spread throughout the inn. Honey, toasted grain, butter. Predictably, footsteps followed. Harold appeared. Then stopped, then stared. The cat opened one eye. Harold stared harder. The cat closed its eye again, apparently unimpressed. You brought home a cat. It brought itself. That's worse. The merchant set down his tea. Much worse. The cat yawned. A tiny pink tongue appeared briefly, then vanished. The creature promptly resumed sleeping, clearly unconcerned by the discussion. Breakfast unfolded peacefully. The cat received a small portion of fish, strictly because it had been waiting outside, and because refusing a cat breakfast felt morally questionable. The creature accepted the offering with dignity, then consumed it with alarming speed, a contradiction that seemed perfectly natural. Afterward, it returned to the hearth, where it resumed supervising the inn, or sleeping. The distinction remained unclear. Round mid-morning, Elias prepared for another greenhouse visit. The cat immediately woke. Interesting. Very interesting. He collected tools. The cat watched. He packed tea. The cat watched. He picked up work gloves. The cat stood. A notification appeared. Snowtail cat. Current mood. Interested. Activity. Following human. Well, that answered the question. The journey to the greenhouse gained a companion. The cat trotted ahead occasionally, then behind, then beside him, never maintaining a consistent distance, always pretending the arrangement was coincidental. Snow crunched beneath their feet, or paws. Sunlight filtered through winter clouds. The orchard stretched quietly around them. Everything felt peaceful. The greenhouse appeared beyond the stone wall exactly as before, yet somehow different, more alive. Perhaps because Elias now associated it with memories. The gardener's journal, the tea circle, the winter mint, the cat. Each discovery added another layer, another story. The structure no longer felt abandoned, simply waiting. The cat entered first, naturally. Apparently ownership had transferred overnight. The little creature immediately inspected several garden beds, then climbed onto one of the stone benches, then settled there, supervising. Again. The day's work focused on the tea circle. Several benches still remained partially buried beneath snow and vines. Nothing difficult, just slow, steady, satisfying, the kind of task perfectly suited to a quiet winter day. Elias worked while sunlight drifted through the broken greenhouse roof. The cat occasionally moved, mostly to sunnier spots. A reasonable strategy. Hours passed comfortably. At some point, he paused for tea. 2 mugs rested upon the stone platform, one for him, one placed beside him. Not because anyone would use it, because the gardener's journal had mentioned sharing tea. The ritual felt appropriate. The cat sniffed the empty mug, then sat beside it. For a brief moment, the scene felt oddly complete, as though someone invisible occupied the second seat. Not a ghost, not anything supernatural, simply the memory of those who had once gathered here. The previous gardener, travelers, friends, people sharing warm drinks while snow fell outside. The greenhouse remembered. That was the feeling. The place remembered. While sipping tea, Elias opened the gardener's journal once more. A folded page slipped loose. He frowned. The paper appeared older than the others, more worn. Carefully unfolding it, revealed a rough sketch, not of plants, not of gardening plans, and a small map of the surrounding valley. Interesting, very interesting. Several familiar locations appeared: the orchard, the road, the inn's approximate location, and farther north, a symbol, a small circle marked beside a stream. Next to it, someone had written, Springwater Hollow. Nothing more, no explanation, no directions, just a name. A notification appeared. Guest book journal discovery. New exploration point added. Springwater Hollow. Status: undiscovered. The valley continued expanding. One small mystery at a time. Elias smiled. The map joined his growing collection of notes. Another future adventure. Another chapter waiting to happen. The afternoon continued peacefully. The tea circle slowly emerged from beneath years of neglect. By now, nearly every bench had been uncovered. The circular platform stood completely visible. The space looked beautiful. Even in winter, perhaps especially in winter, snow rested along the edges. Sunlight reflected from ice crystals. The stone glowed warmly beneath golden afternoon light. A notification appeared. Tea circle restoration. Progress. 100. Feature unlocked. Winter tea gatherings. Atmosphere bonus available. Elias blinked, then smiled. The first complete section. Not the entire greenhouse. Just one small piece. Yet it felt meaningful. A milestone. The cat seemed pleased as well. Though that may have been unrelated. It had discovered a particularly comfortable bench. An important achievement. As the sun began setting, the greenhouse filled with amber light. The stone circle glowed. The remaining snow sparkled. Long shadows stretched across the pathways. The atmosphere felt almost magical. Quiet magic. The best kind. Before leaving, Elias brewed one final pot of wintermint tea. Steam rose into the cold air. The aroma drifted through the greenhouse. Fresh, sweet, comforting. He sat upon one of the restored benches, watching the sunset. The cat curled beside him. For once. Neither moved, neither hurried. The moment felt complete exactly as it was. Eventually darkness approached. The journey home awaited. The cat followed again. Naturally. By now, the arrangement felt permanent. The firefly lantern inn welcomed them back with warm light and wood smoke. Inside, Harold looked up from his chair. Good day. Elias removed his scarf. 3. Greenhouse progress. The tea circle is finished. The merchant nodded. Congratulations. Then he noticed the cat curled comfortably near the fireplace. A familiar sight already. You know, Harold said. I think the cat lives here now. The cat opened one eye, considered the statement, then returned to sleep. A notification appeared. New resident acquired. Snowtail cat. Residence. Firefly lantern inn. Favorite location. Near fireplace. Special effect. Atmosphere 1. Elias laughed. Harold groaned. The cat slept peacefully. And outside, winter settled gently across the valley while another cozy chapter quietly came to an end. Arc 4, Chapter 7. The first tea gathering. The morning began with sunlight. Not bright summer sunlight. Not the sharp brilliance that arrived after a storm. This was winter sunlight. Gentle, golden, soft enough to turn snow into scattered diamonds. Elias noticed it while kneading bread dough. The kitchen windows glowed with pale amber light. Outside, the orchard sparkled beneath a thin layer of frost. Every branch seemed dusted with silver. The valley looked peaceful. The sort of morning that encouraged people to stay a little longer over breakfast. The sort of morning that made tea taste better. The firefly lantern inn slowly woke around him. The familiar sounds filled the building. Wood crackling inside the stove. The creak of old floorboards. The distant rustle of blankets upstairs. And somewhere near the fireplace, a cat snoring. Snowtail had officially adopted the inn. Not that anyone had voted on the matter. The cat had simply made a decision. Everyone else adapted. That seemed to be the cat's preferred approach to life. Elias shaped another loaf, set it beside the others, then glanced toward the small notebook resting near the recipe ledger, the gardener's journal. For the past week, he had found himself reading a few pages every evening, not because the entries contained secrets. Most of them were wonderfully ordinary. Weather notes, tea recipes, observations about herbs, comments about visitors. Yet somehow those ordinary details felt meaningful. The gardener had loved this valley, loved the greenhouse, loved sharing tea. The affection lingered within every page. Last night, one particular line had stayed with him. A simple sentence written near a margin. The greenhouse should grow conversations as well as plants. The idea lingered. Growing conversations. The phrase felt important because the tea circle was finished now. The stone benches had been restored. The pathways clear. The area cleaned. For days Elias had admired the space, yet no one had actually used it. Not properly. Not the way it had been intended. Today, he decided, that would change. A smile appeared. The decision felt right. Simple. Comfortable. Exactly the kind of thing the old gardener would have approved of. He wiped flour from his hands, found a small piece of chalk, then walked into the common hall. A wooden notice board hung near the entrance. Most days it displayed meal specials, road conditions, occasionally weather updates. Today, Elias wrote something different. Afternoon tea gathering. Greenhouse tea circle. All guests welcome. Nothing fancy. Nothing formal. Just an invitation. The kind that didn't pressure anyone. The kind that simply offered a place to sit. A place to share tea. A place to enjoy the afternoon. He stepped back, examined the sign, then nodded. Perfect. Behind him, a voice spoke. You know. Harold had appeared silently, which was impressive for a man who usually sounded like a wagon crossing a bridge. You know. The merchant repeated. Most innkeepers don't build tea circles inside abandoned greenhouses. Elias looked up. Maybe they're missing out. Harold stared, then laughed. You actually believe that? I do. That's the worrying part. Breakfast preparations continued. Soon the kitchen filled with wonderful smells. Honey oat scones baked until golden. Wintermint butter cookies cooled on wire racks. Fresh maple bread emerged from the oven. A small tea cake infused with honey and spice rested beneath a linen cloth. Simple food. Comfort food. The kind of treats designed specifically for long conversations. Snowtail arrived halfway through the baking process. The cat inspected everything, carefully, professionally, then settled near the warmest section of the kitchen, clearly approving. By mid-morning, the first unexpected guest arrived. A traveler, wrapped in a dark, winter cloak, stepped through the front door. Snow dusted her shoulders. A satchel hung across her back. The moment she lowered her hood, Elias recognized her. Clara, the teacher, the traveler who had left directions to the greenhouse. For a moment she simply stared, then smiled. Elias. Clara, you actually found it. The greenhouse. She nodded. I wondered. Elias laughed. Not only found it. Now it was Clara's turn to stare. What does that mean? Wait until this afternoon. Her curiosity became immediately visible. The teacher spent the remainder of the morning near the fireplace, drinking tea, reading, occasionally glancing suspiciously toward Elias, apparently trying to guess what he meant. The second guest arrived shortly before noon. An elderly woman carrying 2 baskets, one filled with yarn, the other filled with baked goods. Rowan, a traveling wool weaver known throughout several nearby villages. She visited the inn once or twice every season, never empty-handed. Today proved no exception. Good afternoon. Gia. She placed a tin on the counter. I brought walnut biscuits. Elias smiled. You didn't have to. Nonsense. Rowan looked horrified. You should never arrive somewhere with empty hands. A rule she appeared unwilling to compromise on. The walnut biscuits joined the growing collection of afternoon treats. By lunchtime, the common hall felt wonderfully cozy. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The fireplace glowed warmly. Snowtail occupied the best chair. Naturally, everything seemed ready. The afternoon gathering would be small. Just a few people. Exactly as intended. No grand event. No celebration. Just tea and conversation. As the winter sun climbed toward its highest point, Elias packed several baskets, hippos, cups, fresh pastries, honey, chow, extra blankets. The preparation itself felt exciting. Not because of the gathering, because the greenhouse was finally being used. The tea circle would no longer be merely restored, it would be alive again. The walk to the greenhouse felt different today. Not solitary, shared. Harold accompanied them. Clara walked beside him. Rowan followed with surprising speed, despite her age. Snowtail trotted ahead, leading the expedition, as though the entire journey had been organized specifically for the cat. The valley welcomed them with crisp winter air. Sunlight glittered across snow-covered fields. Birds drifted between bare branches. Everything looked beautiful, peaceful, still. When the greenhouse finally appeared beyond the stone wall, Clara stopped walking. Her eyes widened. She stood there for several seconds, simply staring. The restored pathways, the cleared garden beds, the repaired tea circle, the traces of care visible everywhere. She repeated softly. Elia smiled. You recognize it. It wasn't like this. It needed work. A little work. Harold snorted. A little. Rowan laughed. Clara slowly walked forward, running her fingers along one of the stone benches, looking around, taking everything in. For a moment, she seemed genuinely moved. The old gardener would probably have liked that. The tea circle looked beautiful beneath afternoon sunlight. Snow lined the edges of the stone platform. Winter mint grew within nearby beds. Glass fragments caught golden light. The entire greenhouse glowed softly, like a lantern made from stone and memories. Everyone found seats. Blankets were shared. Tea was poured. Steam curled upward into the cold air. The first official gathering began. Wintermint honey tea appeared first. The aroma drifted around the circle. Fresh herbs, wildflower honey, a hint of sweetness, a hint of winter. Rowan took one sip, then another, then smiled. Well, she nodded approvingly. That is dangerous. Dangerous. I'll want more. A reasonable concern. Soon plates began circulating. Honey oat scones, wintermint butter cookies, walnut biscuits, tea cake, winter berry jam. Nobody rushed. Nobody checked clocks. Nobody worried about schedules. The afternoon unfolded naturally. Conversation wandered, the way good conversations always do. Harold told a story about accidentally sleeping in a hay barn during a rainstorm years ago. Clara laughed so hard she nearly spilled tea. Rowan shared memories of traveling through snow-covered mountain passes as a young apprentice weaver. Snowtail accepted several unauthorized snacks, an activity at which the cat demonstrated considerable expertise. The stories continued. Small stories, ordinary stories, the best kind. Clara spoke about a student who once pressed autumn leaves between the pages of a school book. Rowan described winter evenings spent knitting beside her husband many years ago. Not sad memories, warm ones. Memories polished smooth by time. The greenhouse seemed to listen. Sunlight shifted slowly across the stone floor. Tea disappeared. Fresh pots replaced empty ones. Hours passed unnoticed. At some point, Snowtail completed a full circuit of the tea circle, receiving attention from every participant. The cat accepted praise, accepted treats, accepted admiration, then climbed directly into Clara's lap, without permission, without hesitation. The teacher laughed. Apparently I've been chosen. Snowtail immediately fell asleep. Problem solved. The group remained there until late afternoon, until sunlight turned amber, until long shadows stretched across the snow, until the greenhouse glowed with the warm colors of sunset. For a few moments, conversation faded. Everyone simply watched. The valley looked beautiful. Golden light covered the hills. The orchard shone in the distance. The firefly lantern inn appeared small, but welcoming. Dome. The sort of view people remembered. Eventually, the gathering ended. Not abruptly, gradually, like the final pages of a favorite book. Cups were collected, blankets folded, baskets packed. Everyone helped. Nobody seemed eager to leave, which felt like success. A notification appeared. Community milestone reached. First tea gathering hosted. Tea circle activated. Guest connection increased. Atmosphere 3. Elias glanced at the message, then dismissed it. For once, the notification didn't matter very much, because the greenhouse already felt different, warmer, lovelier, complete. The tea circle had fulfilled its purpose, not by unlocking bonuses, not by increasing reputation, by bringing people together, exactly as the old gardener intended. As the group walked back toward the inn beneath a sky painted gold and rose, Elias found himself smiling. The greenhouse had grown something today. Not herbs, not vegetables, but flowers, conversations, and somehow, those might be the most valuable things of all. Arc 4, Chapter 8. The tea that travelled. The morning after the tea gathering felt different, not dramatically different. The Firefly Lantern Inn had not suddenly become crowded. No lines of travellers stretched down the road. No merchants arrived carrying contracts. The valley remained quiet. Snow still covered the hills. The orchard still slept beneath winter skies. And yet, something had changed. The feeling reminded Elias of planting seeds. When seeds were first placed into soil, nothing seemed different. The garden looked exactly the same. The earth revealed nothing. No sprouts, no flowers, no visible growth, but beneath the surface, something had already begun. The tea gathering felt like that. So simple, yet somehow important. The effects simply hadn't appeared yet. Elias stood in the kitchen before sunrise, feeding logs into the stove. The familiar warmth slowly spread throughout the room. Firelight flickered across copper pots hanging from the walls. The scent of fresh wood smoke mingled with traces of cinnamon left over from yesterday's baking. Comfortable, familiar, foam. Near the doorway, Snowtail stretched lazily. The cat had developed a routine. Wake up, inspect breakfast preparations, demand food, demand additional food, nap again. A surprisingly efficient schedule. A notification briefly appeared. Snowtail cat. Current mood. Autistic. Likely cause. Breakfast soon. Elias laughed. The system continued understanding cats far too well. Today's breakfast menu remained simple. Maple porridge, fresh bread, honey butter, winter pear preserves, and naturally, winter mint honey tea. The tea had become impossible to remove from the menu. Guests asked for it. Harold requested it. Even Elias found himself drinking several cups each day. The herb possessed an oddly comforting quality. Refreshing without being cold. Warm without being heavy. Perfect for winter mornings. As water heated, he reached toward the carefully stored winter mint leaves. The supply remained limited. The greenhouse produced only small amounts. For now, that would eventually change. At least, that was the plan. The kettle began to whistle softly. Steam drifted upward. The familiar aroma soon followed. Honey. Milk. A hint of sweetness. A hint of mountain air. The scent filled the kitchen. A few minutes later, footsteps appeared. Harold. Predictably, the merchant somehow possessed an internal clock calibrated specifically for fresh tea. He entered. Sniffed the air. Tardid. Excellent. Morning. Morning. Harold accepted a steaming mug, took a sip, then settled into his usual chair. Silence followed. Comfortable silence. The best kind. Breakfast service passed peacefully. A pair of hunters stopped briefly on their way toward the northern forests. An elderly couple shared a table beside the fireplace. Several locals from nearby farms arrived for tea. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable, until one of the hunters lifted his mug. "This is the tea." Elias paused. The tea. The one people were talking about. Interesting. Very interesting. The hunter nodded. Heard about it 2 villages over. Harold nearly choked on his tea. 2 villages. The hunter shrugged. Word travels. Apparently it did. The revelation lingered throughout the morning. People were discussing the tea. Not merely the inn. Not merely the valley. The tea itself. The idea felt strange and oddly satisfying. After breakfast, Clara prepared to leave. The teacher had spent another night at the inn before continuing her travels. Before departing, she approached the counter. "Can I buy some?" Elias blinked. "Buy some what?" "Wintermint tea." The request surprised him. Then again, perhaps it shouldn't have. Clara smiled. "I want to share it with another teacher." A reasonable answer. A good answer. Tea seemed made for sharing. By the time she left, a small bundle of dried wintermint rested safely inside her satchel. The first official tea sale. A notification appeared. Product milestone. Wintermint tea. Shared. Regional interest increased. Tea reputation won. Interesting. The system clearly approved. Later that morning, Elias headed toward the greenhouse. Snowtail accompanied him. Naturally, the cat now considered itself an essential member of all greenhouse operations, despite contributing almost nothing. The journey felt familiar, comfortable. The shepherd path wound through snow-covered hills. The orchard stood silent behind him. Birds fluttered between bare branches. The valley seemed content. Winter had settled into a peaceful rhythm. No storms, no harsh weather, just quiet days. The greenhouse greeted him with golden sunlight. The tea circle looked especially beautiful today. Yesterday's gathering had left traces behind. Dot mess, memories, footprints in the snow, a forgotten napkin, the lingering feeling of laughter. For the first time, the greenhouse truly felt alive, not restored, alive. The distinction mattered. Elias poured himself a cup of tea, sat upon one of the stone benches, and opened the gardener's journal. A random page caught his attention. The best tea spreads by story, not by advertising. Someone drinks it, then tells a friend. The friend tells another friend. Eventually, the tea travels farther than the gardener ever could. Elias smiled. The old gardener seemed unusually wise, or perhaps simply experienced. The observation certainly matched recent events. Wintermint tea had already begun traveling. One cup at a time. One story at a time. The thought stayed with him throughout the afternoon. Work continued steadily. Additional garden beds were cleared. Old irrigation stones were uncovered. Several patches of dormant herbs received attention. The greenhouse gradually revealed more of itself, like a book being read slowly, each day uncovering another page. Around noon, Snowtail discovered something, or rather, sat beside something until Elias noticed it. A common cat strategy. Near the rear wall stood a small wooden cabinet, partially hidden beneath vines. Elias was almost certain he had overlooked it before. Curious, he brushed away debris. The cabinet door creaked open. Inside rested dozens of small ceramic jars. Most were empty. Several remained sealed. Labels covered their sides. Wintermint blend. Valley blossom tea. Snow time brew. The gardener's tea collection. Elias stared. Then stared again. An entire archive. A lifetime of experimentation preserved inside dusty containers. A notification appeared. Discovery. Tea archive found. Historical recipes available. Potential beverage unlocks. 12 new recipes. Elias suddenly felt very excited. The remainder of the afternoon disappeared into careful investigation. Most jars contained only traces. Enough for study. Enough for inspiration. Not enough for serving. Yet each offered clues, flavor combinations, preparation notes, blending techniques. The gardener had clearly approached tea with the same dedication Elias applied to cooking. The discovery felt personal somehow, as though two craftsmen were speaking across time, sharing ideas, exchanging notes, learning from one another. By late afternoon, sunlight filled the greenhouse with amber light. The tea archive sat carefully organized upon the stone platform. Snowtail supervised. As always, a role the cat took very seriously. Eventually, the familiar sound of footsteps approached. Elias looked up. Unexpected visitors. 3 travelers. 2 merchants and a wagon driver. The group stopped near the entrance, looking slightly uncertain. One of the merchants removed his hat. "Sorry to bother you." "No bother." The man hesitated, then asked, "Is this where they serve the wintermint tea?" For several seconds, Elias simply blinked, then laughed. The tea had travelled, apparently faster than expected. The merchants explained. They had heard about the greenhouse gathering, then heard about the tea, then heard about both together. Curiosity eventually won. So, they changed routes, just to see it themselves. The explanation felt surreal and wonderful. Naturally, Elias invited them to sit. The tea circle welcomed additional visitors. A fresh kettle soon warmed above a small portable stove. Wintermint leaves steeped gently. Honey waited nearby. The ritual felt familiar already. Comfortable. Natural. Steam drifted upward. Tea was poured. Conversation followed. The merchants shared road stories. The wagon driver described winter travel challenges. Snowtail accepted admiration from everyone. A predictable outcome. For nearly an hour, the greenhouse hosted another gathering. Smaller, unexpected, yet equally enjoyable. As the visitors eventually prepared to leave, one merchant smiled. "You should keep doing this." "Doing what?" "The tea gatherings." The merchant gestured around the greenhouse. "The world could use more places like this." The words lingered after they departed, because perhaps he was right. Too many places encouraged rushing. Too few encouraged lingering. The tea circle seemed designed specifically for lingering, the slowing down, the conversations, the tea. Back at the inn that evening, Elias found himself unusually thoughtful. The common hall glowed warmly. Dinner simmered upon the stove. Guests chatted quietly beside the fire. Snowtail occupied the best chair. Again. Harold looked up from his ledger. "You look, please." "I found something." "Tea-related." "How did you know?" The merchant sighed. "At this point, it's usually tea-related." A fair observation. Later that night, after dinner ended and the guests retired upstairs, Elias opened the guest book. A fresh page waited. Carefully, he wrote, "Today, strangers arrived asking for tea. Not food. Not beds. I think the greenhouse is beginning to tell its own story now, and stories travel farther than roads." He paused, then added another line. "The old gardener would probably be happy." The entry complete, he closed the book. Outside, snow drifted gently across the valley. Inside, lantern light glowed warmly against polished wood, and somewhere beyond the orchard, hidden behind an ancient stone wall, a restored tea circle waited beneath the winter stars, waiting for the next conversation, waiting for the next traveler, waiting for the next cup of tea, exactly as it had been meant to do. Mark 4, Chapter 9, Springwater Hollow. The map stayed on Elias's desk for 3 days before he finally decided to follow it. Not because he lacked curiosity, quite the opposite. The map occupied his thoughts constantly. Every morning, while preparing breakfast. Every afternoon while working in the greenhouse. Every evening, while reading beside the fireplace. The small circle drawn near the northern stream seemed to quietly call for attention. Springwater Hollow. The name itself felt peaceful, gentle, the sort of place one discovered in old travel journals, the sort of place that probably contained a story. And stories, Elias had learned, rarely stayed hidden forever, especially in this valley. For now, however, life at the Firefly Lantern Inn continued as usual. Winter moved slowly, comfortably. The days followed a pleasant rhythm. Guests arrived. Guests departed. Tea was served. Bread was baked. Snowtail slept in increasingly creative locations. Everything felt wonderfully normal, which made the growing popularity of the greenhouse even more surprising. 2 afternoons each week now featured informal tea gatherings. Nothing official. No reservations. No announcements beyond the small notice board. People simply appeared. Travelers. Locals. Merchants. Teachers. Occasionally shepherds. Sometimes only 3 people attended. Sometimes 10. The number never seemed important. The conversations did. The The greenhouse had become something special. Not famous, not yet, but known. The kind of place people recommended quietly. A hidden treasure. One traveler tells another. A story travels farther than a wagon. The old gardener's words continued proving accurate. This morning, however, felt different. The sky remained clear, the weather calm, the inn unusually quiet. An ideal day for exploration. After breakfast, Elias finally unfolded the map once more. The parchment had aged beautifully. The ink faded in places, yet the route remained clear. The stream, the northern hills, the marked location, Springwater Hollow, a destination waiting patiently. Harold glanced up from his tea. "You've got that look again." Elias sighed. "What look?" "The exploration look." Apparently everyone could identify it now. Even Snowtail. The cat immediately abandoned its chair and approached the door. A notification appeared. Snowtail cat. Current mood. Adventure. Expected activity. Following human. Naturally. Elias packed carefully. Lunch. A notebook. Extra blankets. Winter exploration. Rewarded preparation. The valley remained beautiful, and beautiful places still became cold. By mid-morning, the journey began. The route differed from the greenhouse path. Instead of heading west, beyond the orchard, the map directed him north, toward unfamiliar territory. The realization felt exciting. For months, his world had gradually expanded. First, the inn, then the orchard, then the greenhouse. Now another piece of the valley awaited. The stream appeared after nearly 30 minutes of walking. Clear water flowed between snow-covered banks, ice-lined portions of the surface. Yet the current continued moving steadily. The sound accompanied the journey. Soft, relaxing, almost musical. Snowtail occasionally darted ahead, investigating bushes, inspecting rocks, performing vital cat-related responsibilities. The stream gradually led deeper into the hills. The landscape changed subtly. Fewer pine trees, more open ground, gentle slopes covered in winter grass. The valley felt wider here, older somehow. The further they traveled, the quieter everything became. Not empty, peaceful, like a place people rarely visited. After another hour, the stream curved sharply around a rocky hillside. And suddenly, a hollow appeared. Elias stopped walking. For several moments, he simply stared. The map had not prepared him for this. Springwater Hollow rested within a sheltered depression surrounded by low hills. The stream widened into a crystal-clear pool. Snow covered the surrounding landscape. Yet, the water remained unfrozen. Steam drifted gently from the surface. Warm water. The spring. The name suddenly made sense. Sunlight reflected across the pool like scattered gold. Smooth stones lined the shoreline. Tall grasses emerged from patches of snow. Several birds perched nearby, entirely unconcerned by winter. The place felt hidden, protected, a secret the valley had been keeping. A notification appeared. Location discovered. Springwater Hollow. Rare natural site. 3. Warm spring. Atmosphere bonus. Exceptional. Exceptional seemed accurate. The hollow possessed a unique tranquility, the sort of place that encouraged sitting quietly for an hour without noticing, or perhaps several hours. Snowtail immediately approached the water. The cat sniffed cautiously, then sat beside the shore, apparently approving. Elias found a flat stone overlooking the spring, poured himself tea, and simply enjoyed the view. The water fascinated him. Steam rose continuously, gentle wisps drifting into cold winter air. The contrast looked magical, not dramatic magic, comfortable magic, like a warm fireplace during snowfall. The spring created its own tiny ecosystem. Green plants grew near the shoreline. Birds gathered nearby. Several unfamiliar flowers even bloomed despite winter. Interesting. Very interesting. Naturally, exploration followed. The flowers proved especially intriguing. Tiny white petals, pale blue centers, a sweet fragrance. A notification appeared. New ingredient found. Spring blossom. Season. Year-round. Use. Desserts. Infusions. Rarity. Uncommon. Another tea ingredient. Of course. At this point, the valley clearly understood his priorities. Several careful samples joined his satchel. Research purposes. Entirely professional. The hollow revealed more discoveries throughout the afternoon. A fallen stone bridge. Ancient markers near the stream. A small wooden shelter partially hidden beneath vines. Nothing dramatic. Nothing dangerous. Just history. Small traces of lives once lived. Stories waiting to be uncovered. Near the shelter, Elias discovered something particularly interesting. A carved wooden sign, weathered by time, yet still readable. The inscription stated, "Travelers rest here." Below appeared several names, dozens of names, perhaps hundreds. People had visited this place for years, maybe generations. The realization felt strangely moving. Springwater Hollow wasn't forgotten, merely quiet. A difference, an important difference. The place had never vanished. It simply waited patiently for visitors, like the greenhouse once had. Around noon, Elias unpacked lunch. Bread, cheese, fish. The familiar combination. Snowtail received fish. A contractual obligation at this point. The cat accepted payment. The arrangement continued functioning smoothly. While eating, Elias opened his notebook. Sketches quickly filled several pages. The spring, the shoreline, the shelter. Ideas emerged naturally. Not business ideas, not expansion plans, simply observations, memories. The hollow deserved remembering. Hours drifted by peacefully. The winter sun crossed the sky. Birdsong echoed occasionally. Steam continued rising from the water. Nothing rushed. Nothing demanded attention. The experience felt restorative, a reminder that not every day required productivity. Some days existed simply to be enjoyed. The realization lingered. Back on Earth, he had forgotten that, or perhaps never learned it properly. Life there often felt measured by output, progress, efficiency, results. Here, sitting beside a warm spring with tea and a sleeping cat, those concerns seemed very far away. A notification appeared. Innkeeper insight. Places of rest require caretakers, but caretakers also need places to rest. Elias smiled. For once, the system seemed absolutely correct. Later in the afternoon, while exploring the far edge of the hollow, he discovered another surprise. A wooden box. Not buried, not hidden, simply resting beneath the shelter. Inside lay several journals, protected from weather, carefully wrapped. Travel journals. Dozens of entries from visitors, some recent, some decades old. The discovery felt extraordinary. The guest book, the gardener's journal. Now, this. The valley seemed filled with people leaving stories behind. One entry read, "The spring was warm. The tea was hot. Winter felt smaller today." Another stated, "I visited 20 years ago. It remains exactly as beautiful." And another, "If you find this place, sit for a while. The hollow rewards patience." Elias spent nearly an hour reading. The journals transformed the location. What had already felt peaceful now felt alive, connected, part of a larger community stretching across years. Travelers meeting one another through written words, much like the guest book at the inn. The similarity made him smile. Perhaps that was why he loved journals so much. They allowed conversations to continue across time. As afternoon slowly faded toward evening, the sky turned gold, then amber, then rose. The warm spring reflected every color. The entire hollow seemed illuminated from within. Beautiful, hardly felt sufficient. Snowtail curled beside him on a flat stone. The cat appeared entirely unwilling to leave. A reasonable position. Elias shared the sentiment. Yet eventually sunset arrived, and the inn awaited. The walk home occurred beneath a sky full of stars. The valley glowed silver beneath moonlight. Snow reflected celestial light. The world felt larger somehow, yet also more familiar, because another piece of it now belonged to his story. When the Firefly Lantern Inn finally appeared, warm lanterns welcomed him home. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Light glowed through frosted windows. Comfort. Home. Harold looked up immediately. Well. Elias removed his scarf, then smiled. We found a spring. The cat helped. Harold nodded solemnly. Of course. Dinner followed. So. Fresh bread. The usual comforts. Yet throughout the evening, thoughts of Springwater Hollow lingered. The steam rising from warm water, the traveller's journals, the peaceful silence, the feeling of discovering something precious. Before bed, Elias opened the guest book. A fresh page awaited. Carefully, he began writing. Today I found a place where travellers have been leaving stories for years. The valley seems full of them. Jest books, journals, notes, raps. Perhaps people leave stories because they hope someone will continue them. He paused, thinking, then added one final line. Tomorrow, I'll bring tea to the spring. Some traditions deserve to spread. The book closed softly. The fire burned low. Outside, winter stars shone above the sleeping valley. And somewhere beyond the northern hills, hidden within a quiet hollow filled with warm water and old journals, another chapter of the valley waited patiently to be written. Art 4, Chapter 10. The Valley Remembers. The snow began before dawn. Not a storm, not the heavy kind that buried roads and closed mountain passes, just a gentle snowfall, soft flakes drifting through the darkness, the sort of snow that made the world quieter. Elias noticed it while lighting the kitchen stove. Outside the window, lantern light illuminated countless white specks floating through the air. The orchard looked dreamlike. The old apple trees stood motionless beneath the falling snow. The hills beyond the valley had vanished entirely. Everything felt smaller, closer, protected, like the world had wrapped itself in a blanket. The Firefly Lantern Inn seemed to appreciate mornings like this. The old building creaked comfortably. The hearth crackled. Warmth slowly spread through the common hall. And near the fireplace, Snowtail slept upside down in a chair, a position that appeared profoundly uncomfortable, yet somehow looked completely natural for a cat. Elias smiled, then reached for the tea kettle. Today would be special. Not because the sister had announced anything, not because a quest demanded it, simply because he wanted it to be. For several days now, an idea had been quietly growing, like a seed waiting beneath winter soil. The greenhouse had become a gathering place. The tea circle had welcomed travellers. The tea itself had begun spreading through the region. And Springwater Hollow deserved to become part of the story too. The place felt too beautiful to keep entirely to himself. The warm spring, the traveller's journals, the peaceful silence, the sense of history. The valley hand shared that place with him. Perhaps it was time to share it with others. As steam rose from the kettle, Elias made a decision. Today's gathering would happen at Springwater Hollow, not in the greenhouse, not in the inn, but the spring itself. A winter tea gathering beside warm water. The idea sounded perfect, which usually meant it was worth trying. Breakfast passed pleasantly. News of the gathering spread naturally, not through announcements, not through advertisements, simply through conversation. Harold learned first. Naturally, the merchant somehow discovered everything within 5 minutes. You want to carry tea through the snow? Yes. To a hidden spring? Yes. With guests? Yes. Harold stared, then sighed. The sigh of a man who had long since accepted that resistance was futile. Fine. 5 minutes later, he was helping pack supplies. Clara happened to return that morning. The travelling teacher arrived shortly after breakfast, snow dusting her cloak. Apparently her route had changed unexpectedly. When she heard about the gathering, she smiled immediately. That sounds wonderful. Rowan also appeared, entirely by coincidence, or perhaps not. Sometimes the valley seemed to arrange these things. The elderly weaver arrived carrying another basket of homemade biscuits. Good tea requires good biscuits. This remained one of her core beliefs. Nobody argued. By late morning, a small group assembled. Nothing large, just enough. Harold, Clara, Rowan, a shepherd named Ben, 2 merchants passing through the valley, Elias and Snowtail, who clearly believed the event existed primarily for its benefit. The journey north began beneath gently falling snow. The landscape looked beautiful. Fresh white powder covered every surface. The stream wound through the valley like a silver ribbon. Trees stood silent beneath crystal-coated branches. Nobody hurried. Nobody needed to. The gathering had no schedule, only a destination, and good company. Conversation drifted naturally. Stories, travel experiences, recipes, weather observations, the kinds of discussions that filled winter roads. By the time Springwater Hollow finally appeared, everyone fell quiet. The reaction mirrored Elias's first visit. Wonder. The spring shimmered beneath falling snow. Steam drifted upward into the cold air. The surrounding hills created a sense of shelter, protection, peace. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Clara whispered. Rowan nodded. That seems appropriate. Indeed it did. Some places deserved silence before conversation. The group settled near the shoreline. Blankets were spread. Portable stoves unpacked. Tea kettles prepared. The entire process unfolded leisurely. No rushing. No pressure. Just people working together. The warm spring provided a surprising amount of comfort. Even surrounded by snow, the area felt mild, gentle, inviting. Soon steam rose from multiple kettles. The scent of winter mint drifted across the hollow. Honey, herbs, warm, home. The familiar aroma blended beautifully with the crisp winter air. Elias poured the first cups. The ritual felt almost sacred. Not because tea itself was sacred, because sharing it was. That distinction mattered. The group gathered near the water, holding warm mugs, watching steam rise from both spring and tea. For a while, nobody said much, and that was perfectly fine. Comfortable silence counted as conversation too. Eventually, stories began. They always did. Ben the shepherd described spending winters in mountain cabins. Clara shared amusing tales about students. One merchant recounted a disastrous attempt at baking bread while traveling. The resulting loaf had apparently resembled a weapon more than food. Laughter echoed across the hollow. The sound felt right there, as though the place welcomed it, as though laughter belonged. Snowtail contributed by accepting treats from every participant, a highly important responsibility. The cat performed admirably. After lunch, Clara discovered the traveler's journal box. Soon everyone gathered around, reading entries aloud. Some were funny, some thoughtful, some surprisingly moving. One passage came from decades ago. A traveler wrote, "The spring reminded me that winter is not the absence of warmth. Sometimes warmth simply hides beneath the surface." Nobody spoke immediately afterward. The words lingered. Rowan eventually smiled. "I like that." So did everyone else, inspired by the journals. Clara suggested something. We should leave an entry. The idea spread instantly. Of course they should. The journals existed because travelers contributed to them. The tradition deserved continuation. One by one, people wrote short messages, thoughts, memories, small pieces of themselves. When the journal reached Elias, he paused, then wrote carefully, "Today we brought tea here. The spring welcomed us. The valley felt smaller in the best possible way. I hope future travelers share tea too." Simple, honest, enough. The afternoon passed gently. Nobody wanted to leave. The spring possessed that effect. Time seemed softer there, less demanding, more generous. Hours slipped by unnoticed. Snow continued falling. Tea continued flowing. Conversation continued wandering. The gathering became exactly what Elias had hoped. Not an event, not an attraction, a memory. A shared experience, something people would carry home. As sunset approached, the hollow transformed. Golden light filtered through snowy clouds. Steam glowed amber. The spring reflected the colors of the sky. The entire landscape looked enchanted, beautiful beyond words. Everyone watched quietly. Even Snowtail appeared thoughtful, though perhaps that was simply a cat being sleepy. Then the system chimed. A familiar blue notification appeared before Elias. Larger than usual, brighter, important. Community milestone achieved. Valley gathering hosted. Participants connected. Memories created. Atmosphere increased. A second notification appeared. Winter greenhouse restoration. Status complete. All primary restoration goals achieved. Elias blink. Complete. Already. The realization settled gradually. The greenhouse had been restored. The tea circle had returned to life. Visitors gathered regularly. The project truly was finished. Or at least, this chapter of it. The final notification appeared. Larger than all the others. Blueprint unlocked. House pavilion. Requirements met. Community gatherings. Tea circle restoration. Regional tea reputation. Valley exploration. New construction available. For several seconds, Elias simply stared. A tea house pavilion. Not merely a greenhouse. Not merely a gathering circle. An entirely new building. A place dedicated to tea. Dedicated to community. Dedicated to everything the valley seemed to value. The blueprint felt less like a reward, more like a natural next step. The story continuing. The walk home occurred beneath a sky painted gold and violet. Lanterns glowed warmly in the distance. The Firefly Lantern Inn waited at the edge of the orchard. Home. Everyone seemed content. The gathering had left a comfortable sort of tiredness, the kind that followed good conversations, good food, good company. That evening, after dinner ended and guests retired upstairs, Elias sat alone in the common hall. The fireplace crackled softly. Snowtail occupied the chair beside him. The guest book rested open on the table. A fresh page waited. He dipped his pen into ink, then began writing. Today we carried tea to Springwater Hollow. People shared stories, laughed, read old journals, added new entries. For a little while, it felt like the entire valley was sitting around the same table. The greenhouse is complete now. The tea circle is alive again. And somehow this inn feels larger than before. Not physically, something else. As if every conversation leaves behind a tiny light, and enough lights together become a home. He paused, listening to the fire, listening to the quiet breathing of the sleeping inn, then added one final sentence. I think the valley remembers kindness, and when it does, it gives a little back. The ink dried slowly. The fire burned low. Outside, snow continued falling across the sleeping valley. The greenhouse stood beneath moonlit drifts. Springwater Hollow steamed gently in the darkness. And somewhere beyond both, the future tea house pavilion waited to be built. As an ending, but as the beginning of the next story. End of Arc 4.